announcements before we begin the program. First one, Jim Ramsey has some wonderful news about a connection that we are developing with the many veterans who are residents of the VA hospital in Bedford. So here you go, Jim.
Thank you, Linda. On November 4th, we'll be launching a new collaboration with the hospital. And that collaboration involves our inviting the veterans at the hospital, most of whom are in a long-term care situation. Much of the hospital is really a nursing home for veterans, so they're there over a long period. And so what we'll be doing is really inviting them. I mean, they're veterans just like we're veterans, and they're close by. We're going to be inviting them to join in our programs. Now, it's certainly true that they won't be able to come to Lexington to participate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our programs to them. And we'll kick it off initially with, I think, as most of you know, our programs are all recorded. So what we'll do is we'll provide either DVDs or YouTube videos, and they will be shown to the veterans over there. All of our programs are high quality military history, national affairs. They're of interest to us, and they'll certainly be of interest to those veterans. In time, we hope to introduce live streaming over the internet so that the veterans there, or really anybody anywhere, will be able to participate, if you will, in our programs on a real-time basis. So that's kind of the broad picture. Specifically on November 4th, Linda and some other members of the executive committee will be over at the VA hospital. We'll meet with a group of the veterans there. We'll kick this off. We'll welcome them to our association on behalf of all of us. We'll show, we'll screen basically the first program. This will be the first of a monthly series. The programs will be offered on Mondays at 1:15, and that will make for a smooth transition once we do live streaming, because then on the second Monday of the month, in addition to all of us here, we'll have at least some of those folks over there participating too. So that's the deal, and just certainly thought you ought to know about it. So, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. You know, Jim tells us that there are nearly 300 veterans living in long-term care at the Bedford VA. Now, of course, not all of them have full cognitive ability, but you know what? A great many of them do. They have physical issues, but their minds are in great shape. And programs like ours will be just extremely welcome to them. So we're very, very happy that we're going to be able to include all of these veterans in our programs. Do you have a question, comment?
Are you going to include the people in the Bedford Green?
Did everybody hear that?
No.
Will we include the residents of the Bedford Green apartment?
I would say ultimately we will, because I know that the initial effort will be centered in, will be physically shown in one of the long-term care units, which is different from Bedford Green. However, when live, and I say when as opposed to if, when live streaming happens, then of course it'll be available to anybody. So the veterans in Bedford Green, either in their rooms or in a group or under any setting where they can get access to a computer, will be able to participate. So, yeah.
Thank you. Bob Lewis made us aware of a very nice offer to veterans on Veterans Day that we thought everybody should know about.
Good afternoon. The Trustees of Reservations has over 100 really beautiful properties in Massachusetts, and on Veterans Day, those properties are open for free, and some of them are really amazing. For example, there's a tour of the Crane Estate, the home of the Crane family. You're going to give the tour. It'll be open for free. So take a look at the website of the Trustees of Reservations and see which one you'd like to do, and then plan on it on November 12th, Veterans Day. The URL for their website is a little different. It's www.thetrustees.org. So you have to put the in front of trustees.org. And it'll be all clear to you.
Correction, I think Veterans Day is November 11, not 12.
Okay, Veterans Day.
It was 11.
Yep. Our program is November 12th, next month. Perhaps that's what he might have been referring to. Okay, thank you very much, Bob. Does anybody else have an announcement of interest to the group that you'd like to share? Okay, well, if not, many of you have already met Andrew, our speaker. I had to literally tear him away from some of you to start the program, but let me give a more formal introduction to him and then turn it over to him. So, our speaker, Anfrew Biggio, can point to 3 achievements, any one of which would qualify for honor, recognition, and standing up here and giving a 1-hour presentation. But he's only going to talk about one of them today. He served his country as a U.S. Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan, but he's not going to talk about that. He has formed 2 charities, and he's raised over $1 million to help severely injured veterans improve their mobility, their living conditions, and their independence. But he's not going to talk about that. What he is going to talk about is his priceless M1 Grand Rifle, the weapon that won World War II. After reading a letter written by his great uncle and namesake, who perished in World War II, about what that rifle meant to him, Andrew was able to buy one. He showed it to his 92-year-old neighbor, a World War II veteran of the South Pacific, who came alive when he saw the rifle because it never left his side for 3 solid years. And Andrew asked his neighbor to sign the rifle, and a tradition began. Andrew knew then that he had something special, that he had to seek out more World War II veterans and get their signatures on the rifle. Today there are more than 100 such signatures representing 100 stories. Andrew will share a small number of them with us today. We will also have a very special rifle signing event later in the program, and I'm going to let Andrew tell us a little more about that when the time comes. So, please welcome Anfrew Biggio.
Thank you so much, guys. We're just going to start with a little bit of a video here.
This rifle is signed by approximately 93 World War II veterans. About 30 of them on this have already passed away. The VA says there's less than 300,000 World War II veterans still alive of the 16 million who served during World War II. I made it a mission, call it therapy, call it research, call it what have you, of meeting these men that we've been reading about our whole lives, and go see each one and interview them and learn how to live a successful life after combat. Albert served with the 3rd Infantry Division during World War II, and an artillery shell landed in front of him, killed his sergeant, and blew off Albert's leg. Today he's 94 years old. He's never been back to Italy, and we're going back for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Rome.
We have tickets for you to go to Italy, back to where you were wounded.
The second soldier we're bringing back is the young age. He turned 94 today. His name's Rocco Talise. He lives down the street from me. He's 94 years old, has all his wits. He served with the 85th Infantry Division.
This is my 6th trip, and this is the most memorable one because it will probably be my last.
Italy is, without a doubt, the forgotten front. We do not memorialize or recognize any anniversaries in Italy to the extent that we do Normandy. Rocco had photos of an ammo box that he left in one of the abandoned houses in Tremensoli back in 1944. We didn't get to find those ammo crates, but when those women, those villagers, grabbed his photos and started to go through them, they started to laugh, cry, and celebrate because they were actually pointing themselves out in his photos that are over 50 years old. That was hands down better than actually bringing home any type of physical artifact.
And people here is recognizing other people on the photographs. It's just crazy, amazing.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to bring these guys back to where they fought, because in 5 years, we are not going to have any World War II weapons left. That was Albert's first time seeing his squad leader's grave ever, and even knowing it, remembering his last name, and I guess I didn't realize how personal it was going to get.
And he got 100% of his shell. It's something that hit me. I don't know.
The rifle led us here, and seeing the closure it brought to Albert and Rocco made me feel like that my mission was complete.
It's all set, you can exit it, yeah. So as you saw that little video there, I had 93 signatures on the rifle then. I got about 111 today on here. And why do I have everybody signing this rifle, right? So, as I was introduced, well, first of all, thank you for having me here at your Lexington Veterans Association. It means a lot to be here to even speak and engage. This is something I never thought would be happening if you talked to me, 15 years ago in the Marine Corps, or enlisting in the Marine Corps. But I served in the Marines. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm a veteran of both of those conflicts. And I came home from my time in the service, and my generation of veterans started to get this whole kind of stigma of PTSD, veteran suicide, and what have you. And I tried to say to myself, well, we're not the first generation of veterans to go to war and come home. There was men before us who did it. There was women before us who did it. Someone must know how to live a successful life after combat, okay? And growing up my whole life, right off my front step of my door was a street sign. And as you know, in Massachusetts, if somebody was killed in war, most of the corners are named after the boy that was killed in action. So my name was Anfrew Biggio, and every day when I left my house as a young kid, I would see Anfrew Biggio Square, Anfrew Biggio Square. And often my friends would tease me about it and go, hey, there's your street sign, there's your square, and it wasn't. And I knew I had a relative who died in a war when I was younger. When I served in the Marines, I had that thought in the back of my head. But when I left from my front porch to go to war myself, I said, wait a second. The last Anfrew Biggio to leave this front porch and to go to war never came home. So that was kind of an odd feeling for me in my head. But it came and went, and I did my time. And I came home, and that street sign was still there. And I said to myself, you know, what happened to that Anfrew Biggio that didn't happen to me? Like, why is it fair that I get to come home and he didn't, my long-lost relative? So the curiosity started to become more of an investigation when I went to my grandmother's house and I said, Nana, do you have any letters that Anfrew had written home before he was killed in Italy during the war? And she said, yeah. I went under the bed, I pulled out a shoebox full of letters he wrote home fighting up the coast of Italy before he was killed in action on September 17th, 1944 on what was known as the Gothic Line. It was a set of defense lines that the Germans had set up as they're getting pushed out of Italy. It was very, very hellacious fighting that he wrote home about. But the first letter that I pulled out of that shoebox was a letter that contained a nice paragraph on how much he enjoyed the M1 rifle and how much he enjoyed shooting it and carrying it. And at that moment right there, as a veteran myself, I said, I'm going to go out and purchase an M1 rifle. I want to feel what he felt. I want to have this keepsake in our family. This is history. And who knows, maybe I was looking for some comfort myself of having a relative who had fought and had seen combat. So I purchased this M1 rifle. It's a 1945 Winchester. It is one of several models that were used during the Second World War. This was the standard rifle that you were issued, especially as an infantryman during the Second World War. And in Korea and in the early stages of Vietnam. So I got this rifle now in my house, and I'm, you know, pretending to be G.I. Joe in my house. I'm aiming in, I'm pointing at it, like, okay, but like, now what? Now what do I do with this? So I take it to my family, and I show my grandmother, and I show my grandfather, and I show my cousins, like, hey, look, this is the rifle Uncle Andy had when, you know, and, you know, they just looked at it, okay, it's a gun, you know, whoop-de-doo. So I wasn't fulfilled about my purchase and what it meant to me, and they didn't get it. Maybe it's because they weren't veterans either, you know. So I said, well, my next door neighbor had fought in the Battle of Okinawa. I'll go show him this, and maybe we can actually have an intelligent conversation about this, what this piece of history is here. So I knocked on Joe Drago's door, and at this age, Joe Drago, I think, was about 92. This is 2 years ago. Joe has since passed. And I said, hey, Joe, do you remember this? And he answered the door, and Joe's legs had been atrophied. They were very skinny. He had been bound in his recliner now for several years due to, you know, his age. And he's hunched over, and I put the rifle in his hand. And I said, hey, Joe, you remember this? And he just lit up, and he started swinging it around the room and aiming in, and the stories just start flying. He's smiling from ear to ear. I've never seen my elderly neighbor behave in this fashion my whole life. He was always that grumpy, crusty old man that if a foul ball went into his yard, he'd yell at us, and we'd play ding-dong ditch and run away, and you know, little did I know who the hell I was teasing, all right? I ought to slap myself in the face now. He was a Marine who fought in the Battle of Okinawa with the 22nd Marine Regiment. And it's the bloodiest battle of the Second World War. It was the Battle of Okinawa. It's often not talked about because it was the very last battle, and Europe had already given up by then. But it was bad. It was quadruple the size of Normandy, the invasion of Okinawa, and it was the last stop before the homeland of Japan, and the Japanese fought tooth and nail. And here I am bonding from Marine to Marine with this old guy who I picked on and who was mean to me, and here we are at the last stage of his life, and sorry, I get choked up about this part. But he said, I want to give you something, and go into my sock drawer. I'd like to give you something. These are yours now. And he said, you'll see a velvet Crown Royal bag in my sock drawer. So I went over to his sock drawer, I pulled out the velvet Crown Royal bag, and there was some stuff in there, and I opened it up, and it was Japanese gold teeth that he had cut out of someone's head on the Battle of Okinawa. I know it's gruesome. I know it sounds horrible. That's simply just what the greatest generation was doing back then. It's things we often look over and see past. And I say to myself, you know, I think about serving in Iraq and Afghanistan and some of the wrongdoings that happened over there, and the greatest generation that we look up to so much, and we're, you know, who we live as veterans ourselves, everyone in this room live in the shadows of, we're doing some of the biggest war crimes, you know, committed. But that's just, you know, what happened in the South Pacific. I went on to interview, I don't know, another 15 Marines who fought in the Pacific, and every one of them had human remains still in their houses. So it's just what happened. They collected gold teeth, they did that stuff. But holding those teeth and those gold teeth, which I still have, it brought a sense of, you know, a sense, it released a pressure off my chest that these guys are no different than today's veterans. They're known as the greatest generation, but in reality, they were facing an extraordinary time, and they did extraordinary things during extraordinary time, stuff of which isn't the best to be proud of, but it was just a card that was dealt then. And that's when I started to realize that that's when the bonding really hit. And I looked and I said to Joe, I want you to sign this rifle. I want to always remember this moment. I grabbed a white ink pen that I had at that time, and I had Joe add his name to this rifle. And when I left his house with that sense of relation to him and sense of that nobody's perfect, I said, I think I want to add I want to try to get as many names as possible on this of the World War II veterans that may be still around. Now this is 2016, I believe I started this project. I'm over 2 years into it now. And I said, well, guess what? World War II veterans just simply aren't over your shoulder anymore. A lot of them are in assisted living homes, a lot of them are in nursing homes, a lot of them don't leave the house, a lot of them don't travel. Unless you meet like a freak of nature here, like Mr. Pat Flynn, who's in the front row here, who's 94 years old, Pat?
It's 95.
95. And it's a rarity. It's a very rarity. Yeah, there was one day that this whole room was probably full of World War II veterans. So I left Joe's house and kind of started off not in the right mission that I planned on. I was trying to get answers on what happened to my great uncle in World War II, but here I am interviewing a Marine from the Pacific. So I firmly believe that everything happens for a reason. So I said, well, you know what, it's time to find some men who were on that hill with my uncle Anfrew Biggio before he was killed in Italy in 1944. So let's try to find some veterans who served in Europe. And then I'm just going to pull up these photos here, if you get the photos for me. So I'll continue to talk, but I wanted to see what happened on that hill in Italy. I wanted to find out what happened to my Uncle Andrew, and that required serious research. That required finding what divisions specific veterans fought with, looking at the after-action reports, reading the names of the men, where they were wounded, what they did, how they served, and most of all, looking up their phone number and seeing if they're still alive, which was like a 13% chance compared to all the research I was doing. So I'll wait for the photos to get pulled up here in a second. But the 34th Division in general, we'll talk about, right? There's 112, as I was, 111 men and women on this rifle, okay? Right now, I will talk about Mr. Carl DeChico, who served with the 34th Infantry Division in World War II. Who was the 34th Division, okay? The 34th Division was a Minnesota National Guard unit who were one of the first Army units deployed during the Second World War. They landed in North Africa somewhere around late 42 into 43. They were one of the first divisions to start fighting the Germans in North Africa. Eventually they made their way to Italy. And they ended the war with over 500 days of consecutive combat, over 500 days on the front line. We often don't hear about units like this because history tends to really focus on Normandy, the 101st Airborne, the jumps into Normandy, things like that. Those units really only had 200 days of combat, okay? I'm not by any means getting into a measuring contest with World War II veterans, it's World War II. But compared to other divisions, they're simply just not Hollywood enough and didn't make the amount of newsreels and books and TV as some of the other units did. So Mr. Carl DeChico is right there, 95 years old as well. I was scanning the 34th Infantry Division website, which in 2006, in 2001, the US government started to declassify the after-action reports of the Second World War and giving them to the associations and the reunions and things like that. So of course, on the after-action report, I go to September 17th, which was the date my uncle was killed. And I start reading about all the men in those that got wounded or earned the Silver Star or Bronze Star or Purple Heart that day, and I'm looking through the names, and I see this man, Carl DeChico, and I see his Silver Star citation. And it reads that while Sergeant DeChico was on a patrol throughout the Gothic Line at nighttime, they reached a series of barbed wire fences. Sergeant DeChico's squad began to crawl underneath the barbed wire defenses when a German flare went off above his head, exposing his whole squad while they're underneath the barbed wire. At that time, German machine gun and German mortar rounds began to rain on Sergeant DeChico's squad, wounding and killing several men of his squad. Sergeant DeChico, although also wounded in the shoulder by shrapnel, continued to crawl underneath the barbed wire within 30 meters of the German pillbox that were shooting at him. Sergeant DeChico loaded a rifle grenade to his M1 Garand and fired it at the pillbox, taking off a German's head who was firing the flares. As he got within 10 meters of the pillbox, he began to lob 6 to 7 hand grenades that he carried with him, killing 2 other Germans and having 3 other Germans surrender. Sergeant DeChico earned the Silver Star for taking that pillbox, and the only reason why he was not given the Distinguished Service Cross is because as he was lobbing grenades that were bouncing off this cone-shaped pillbox, they were rolling down the hill and actually blowing up in the faces of other Americans, okay? They didn't die, luckily, but when you wound another lieutenant from another platoon, you're probably not going to get the Distinguished Service Cross. So I say, holy cannoli, this guy's a badass. I need him to sign this rifle. If he's alive, which is like probably most likely not. I find, and then at the bottom of the citation it says, enters the service from Norristown, Pennsylvania. All right, so I go on Google and I Google Carl DeChico, Norristown, Pennsylvania, and a phone number comes up. I'm like, okay. I call the phone number, it rings 3 or 4 times, and I hear an old man answer the phone, and I can't believe it. And I say, Carl, my name's Anfrew Biggio, my uncle blah, 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 and I'm from Massachusetts. He goes, Massachusetts? That liberal state? And he hung up the phone in my face. Hung up the phone in my face, okay? True story. I'm wicked defeated right now. So, I go, great. I called him up again. I said, Carl, no, you're not listening to me. He's like, no, I was scammed from a guy in Massachusetts. I'm not interested. Yes, I served with the 34th Division. It was the best days of my life. Goodbye. He hangs up again. So I go, you son of a bee, you're not getting away this easy. So, at that rate, I think I had, I don't know, 30 or 40 signatures on the rifle, maybe less than that. And still nobody from my uncle's division, okay? So I removed the upper handguard here, okay, of the rifle, which at this time was blank. And I mail it to his house. I said, I may never see this piece of the rifle again, but I don't care, it's worth it. I'm just simply just trying to find a guy who may have been with my uncle on that hill fight in Italy. You know, give me a break, buddy, you know? So I wrote a nice letter to him, added the rifle, and I sent it to his house. I say, I may never see this piece of the rifle again, but I can always replace it. About 2 weeks later, I get a package on my front door. And it's signed, Carl DeChico, Company G, 34th Infantry Division, 135th Infantry Regiment. I'm sorry, I thought you were a scam. I turned 94 today. Good luck with your project. And he signed it. So I went right to the phone. I called Carl back. I said, Carl, I got your package. He goes, what? You coming by? And I said, sure. So about 3 days later, I drove down to Norristown, Pennsylvania. I was on it was Memorial Day weekend anyway. I was going down to not Walter Reed, but yes, actually I was going down to Walter Reed to find some wounded veterans for my other nonprofit that was mentioned earlier. But to also go to Arlington National Cemetery, where I have several friends buried there as well. So Pennsylvania was on the way. I stopped with Carl, and we talked. We did about a 2-hour-long interview, and that Silver Star citation doesn't even scratch the surface. Carl landed. Carl's first action with the 34th Division was a place called Anzio. Does anyone familiar with Anzio? He's brand new. They had to basically relieve elements of the 3rd Infantry Division that were along the beachhead. Carl and another soldier set up a machine gun, what they thought was a good idea, in the first floor of a house. And by day 2, a large artillery round hit the house, which they think may have been a famous railgun called Anzio Annie. Not too sure, because just the crater that this explosion caused, it blew up the house, put a hole in the ground, and buried Carl alive with the other man on the machine gun. Carl and this man were buried alive for 2 days on the Anzio beachhead. The other man, whose name he did remember it, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, was in a lot worse shape than Carl was. He had been crushed in the pelvis area, and he was screaming to Carl for about 24 hours, screaming at the top of his lungs, a lot more crushed than Carl was. Carl was more or less buried in the waist, covered in loose dirt, but this poor guy was crushed by some heavy concrete blocks. And Carl said, listen, I just need you to pray. Can you pray? The man said, I don't know how to pray. So under the rubble, Carl is teaching this man how to pray while they're trapped. By the second day, he did not hear the other soldiers screaming anymore. But an American patrol could hear Carl also yelling out, and they found him. And Carl said he could feel somebody patting the head of their hair as they're getting rid of the dirt, and then he could feel someone touching the head of his hair. And the patrol began to pour water down through the concrete blocks into Carl's mouth to keep him alive. It was the night of day 2. A medic stayed with Carl. They were able to get more debris off of there. Mind you, this rescue crew is still getting shot at and shelled by the Germans. Okay. Finally, Carl is released from the ground, and that second soldier did die in that pit in Anzio that day. Carl recovered in a hospital in Naples for several months until it was finally, you're back on the front line. If you can walk and talk and breathe, you were back to the front line. Mind you, he probably had a traumatic brain injury. Who else knows what other issues they had? But they cleared him to go back, and he joined back with the 34th Division just as they were liberating Rome, walking through Rome for that stuff. Carl is back fighting up the coast to Leghorn. It's the east coast of, it's the west coast of Italy. He's shot through the bicep, I believe, in a town called Rosignano, Italy. So that's his second Purple Heart. His third Purple Heart is when his Silver Star citation, I told you about assaulting the Gothic Line, and then he gets a fourth Purple Heart in Po Valley. So he had a Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters on it. This man ended the war went from the front of the war as a replacement in the 34th Division and finished the war. And then at the end of the war, they messed up his point system, and he didn't even get to go back with his own division back to America. So. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about, comparing, contrasting modern wars and modern veterans or World War II veterans, and, it started to become evident to me that I should have been documenting these men's stories in a book. That way a younger veteran who might be coming home, dealing with stressful issues and maybe feeling sorry for himself or suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder can open up a story like Carl's and say, wow, if this guy can do it, so can I. If this man was able to come home, live a successful life after combat, so can I. And that's what I really want the younger veterans to start looking at, is these men went through hell and were able to come home, start a career, have a job, have a family, complete college, become a lawyer, become a postman, become a police officer, become a doctor, a teacher, an insurance broker, what have you, then so can I. Problem was, Carl had no idea who my uncle was. So I'm still on this mission to find more men from the 34th Division. So in the meantime, I run into another, 20 or more veterans who fought in Normandy, who fought in Holland, who fought in Burma, who fought in Japan, who fought in Iwo Jima, who fought in Guadalcanal, who served in the air war, who were B-17 pilots, who were tail gunners, who were ball turret gunners, who were tankers. I'm covering the whole war on this rifle, but I still don't have anybody who fought with Andy Biggio on that hill outside Barberino, Italy on September 17th. Where can they be? They gotta be still out there. There's gotta be a chance. And that's when I met Mr. Ed Hess, okay? That's Ed at his local VFW, still drinking Rolling Rock beer at 99 years old. He's 99 in this photo, he's 100 now. This was last year. He's 100 years old. I'm searching the archives through the internet, and I find a story about a man who is the 1997 Veterans Day Parade in Media, Pennsylvania, and Mr. Carl is, Mr. Ed Hess, right there, is the Grand Marshal of the 1997 Media, Pennsylvania Veterans Day Parade. He served with Company B, 135th Infantry Regiment, 34th Division in Italy. Company B, a company roughly 200 men. Carl didn't know my uncle because he was in Company G. My uncle was in Company B. We're getting somewhere now. The problem with, you may or may not know most guys know guys in their company. It's 200 men, you run into them at one point or another where you're drawing weapons, you're training, you're eating chow, you're from Boston, I'm from Boston, that sort of thing. But what happened was, when you have 500 days of consecutive combat, the same Company B that took Anzio isn't the same Company B that assaulted the Gothic Line in September. Guys are killed, guys are replaced. It's just, if you took a platoon photo or a company photo before the 34th Division left the United States, that photo, the faces in that photo would have changed almost 10 times because of people coming and going. So I call Ed's house. His son answers. Oh, sure, you can meet my father. He goes down to the VFW every Thursday night, and we'll be there this Thursday. I said, no problem. Now here I am driving back to Pennsylvania. Ed comes walking in with his walker in the VFW, and I remember I got to the VFW a little bit early that night, and they said, who are you? As any small watering hole who don't recognize you, ask you what your business is doing in there. And I said, oh, actually, I'm here to see one of your VFW members, Ed Hess. Oh, Ed, no problem. What brings you here? What's your project? I explained it to them. They don't take money for my beers. They don't. They give me my own private room to meet Ed, and on the security camera, I could see Ed coming into the VFW with his walker. He sits down and we start talking. He starts telling me also about Monte Cassino and in Italy and Anzio, and I'm just like, I really want to fast forward to September, to what happened on the Gothic Line, assaulting those ridges on the Gothic Line. So Company B is outside of a town called Barberino, Italy, which is about mid to north Italy. And now, because of all the fighting in Normandy, Hitler is extremely infuriated that he does not want to give up Italy, and they are simply not allowed to surrender the Germans in Italy. Okay, Hitler's losing turf now. He's got war on 3 fronts, if you want to look at it that way: Russia, Italy, and then Holland and France in that area. And you'll often hear stories that the German soldiers who fought in Normandy were old men and young boys and stuff like that, but that was not the case for Italy, because Italy had the Hermann Göring division down there in Italy, and these guys were trained soldiers. They did fight in Russia, and they were simply not just your regular Germans. They were They were battle tested, they were ready, they had been in Italy a lot earlier in the war, in North Africa, and they were ready to rumble, and we had our 19 and 18-year-old American boys fighting these guys. So they set up a staging area outside Barberino, Italy, and the first hill, the Americans take the Italian Americans who are from New York, Boston, and New Jersey, they put them in civilian clothes, and they send them into town to hear what they can hear the Italians talking about where the Germans are, what the Germans did, and they come back and inform the platoon and the company of where the Germans might be. Everything is pointing to Hill 509, right outside Barberino. The Germans are up there. They're taking artillery up this hill with oxen, with ox cars pulling the artillery up there. There could be maybe a couple hundred Germans in this area. So it's up to Company B of the 135th Infantry Regiment to be the spearhead into the Gothic Line, all right? These are the Gothic Line. There were several different lines in Italy, the Gustav Line, the Winter Line, and it was basically from east coast to west coast of Italy, pillboxes, barbed wires, spider holes, artillery. It was a slaughter for these poor guys. So Company B is ready to go towards this hill, and boom, their staff sergeant steps on a mine, blows off both his legs. Okay, right before the hill. The Americans are very upset that the Italian in the farmhouse didn't even give them a heads up that there was a minefield. They grabbed all of that Italian farmer's sheep and they forced them through the minefield, blowing them up and clearing the minefield. So now the platoon has to go by their staff sergeant missing his legs and squirming, screaming sheep all blown to bits and ripped apart by mines. That's their intro to the Hill 509, walking past that. They're making their way up the hill and their lieutenant, Kimball, takes a round right in the forehead and gets killed on this hill. They said that it looked like the Germans had taken chainsaws to the trees because there was nowhere to hide on this hill when they started to get midway up this hill. The Germans had cut down the trees, there was nowhere to duck behind, nowhere to hide. There was rows of barbed wire, there was U-shaped trenches, there was pillboxes, and it has a story. And they're saying, why are they forcing us up this hill? This is friggin' suicide. We're going up this hill, there's nowhere to hide, and it's literally just a slaughter. And again, we go back to the stories of the greatest generation, which they are, and the movies of valor, the movies of heroism, but we never talk about, which I talked about a lot with these men who are now in the last stages of their life that don't want to hold any more secrets, of stories of cowardice, stories of mutiny, stories of retreat, and B Company is ready to no longer go up this hill anymore. They have X amount of wounded. They just lost one of their platoon sergeants, one of their platoon commanders, and why are we going up this hill? A mutiny is now happening on this hill of men refusing. Guys from Company B are walking off the hill. They're leaving. They're not going up this hill anymore. All right? This is confirmed by 3 people who I ended up meeting after Ed Hess about this story on this hill in Italy. Okay? This is not obviously in your history books or movies because it's an awful thing. We can't pass judgment because we weren't there. Ed is one of those men who bails off the hill. He goes to his lieutenant and he says, "Sir, I've been carrying the BAR, the Browning automatic rifle, since Monte Cassino. What do I have to get killed? Why can I go to the rear and do a job in the rear? This is insane. I have to keep staying up here." And he cracks. The man cracks, okay? Again, I can't pass judgment. I wasn't there. I don't know what it's like to be fighting the Germans on a hill in Italy. And a lot of these men on this rifle did admit to me that they suffered combat fatigue during World War II, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. A lot of them, these men ended up in mental homes after the war. And they talk about it now, but they probably hid it their whole lives after they came home. The lieutenant says, "Tough shit, you're staying up here, we need you, we need as many men as we can get." And then Ed's left with the BAR and thinking about this is it, he's gonna die. Well, a few minutes later, a soldier comes up to Ed and takes his BAR from him and says, "The lieutenant wants me to carry the BAR, he wants you to go back down to the bottom of the hill." So to his surprise, the lieutenant gave in and allowed Ed Hess to come off the front line, go down the bottom of the hill. and stay there. It was several days later when Ed started to hear more and more what the kind of hard time these men were having up on that hill, and another officer saw Ed hanging out in the rear, okay? The company headquarters down at the bottom of the hill, and says, what are you doing here, you know? He said, sir, I was told to come back down the hill by the lieutenant. He said, bullshit. Take the GRO men, GRO stands for Graves Registration Officers, take them up to the top of the hill to where the platoon, where the company was now. And so if you're familiar with Graves registration officers, well, in World War II, once we took land, we owned it. And once we took land, we developed a lot of cemeteries, okay? Now they're all consolidated into specific cemeteries in Europe, but there was a lot of makeshift temporary cemeteries. Ed Hess climbs back up the hill with the Graves registration officer, and that's where 37 men of his company are stacked up, dead, killed in action. One of them being Andy Biggio, okay? Ed Hess is 99 years old, telling me this story and crying his eyes out at the VFW in Media, Pennsylvania. And if you've never seen a 99-year-old man cry, I hope you never do, because it's the hardest thing that what this guy was carrying this whole time. The fact that the only reason why he's 99 years old and drinking a beer with me at the VFW is because he tapped out on that hill in Italy and has to come off. Because he most likely would have been killed, along with the 37 other men killed. 37 killed, not wounded and everything else. With the 37-year-old other men that he had to now drag down to the bottom of this hill, body after body after body, with the Graves registration officers. I have video of him crying and telling that story, but I don't share it because it's just, I don't know, maybe one day I will share that video, but I'm not ready to share that yet and embarrass him. Here he is with the next of kin of or at least a surviving family member of a great uncle that he left on that hill in Italy, more or less, to be killed. You know, I can only imagine what Anfrew Biggio, being 19 years old, who didn't come off the hill, what his last moments of his life were. So we share a moment. He signs my rifle proudly. He could have made up any lie he wanted to, and I would have ate it up, but he didn't. He was honest, he was truthful, and I was so proud to have him on this rifle. And he said, you know, you might want to talk to someone else who was on that hill that day. I go, I've been searching for you guys all over the country. Does you know another guy? And he goes, yeah, he lives an hour from here. He's in Bridgeton, New Jersey. His name is John Heimer. And I said, okay. He's like, yep, he was on that hill that day too. So the next morning, I jump in my car and I'm on the way to Bridgeton, New Jersey. And I meet Mr. John Heimer, 96 years old. Company B, 135th Infantry Regiment. And he remembers the day Andy did die. And it was, so they actually started to assault the hill on September 12th. September 17th, John Heimer and another soldier were to crawl up to the barbed wire and start clipping the barbed wire with wire cutters. When they looked up, they saw 2 German officers just staring at them. They froze, and when they turn around, they can see the members of their platoon waving them back to come back. He said it was a mortar barrage like he's never seen before after that. And young Andy took shrapnel through his stomach and out his lower back when he was killed. He was carrying the radio. So while everyone else was hugging the ground, they suspect that Andrew had still stayed standing to give the position of the Germans, and ultimately took shrapnel through his stomach and out his lower back, dying that day on the hill. You know, a week goes by, and then Ed Hess has to go up there with the Graves registration officer, and by that time there's 37 men from the company just killed in a flat area. I went back to Italy, I climbed that hill, and I went back to that flat area where my uncle was killed in Italy to help understand it before I started writing about the whole situation of those men. So I solved the mystery, you know, more or less, of what went on that day, with 75 years later, mind you, with what limited resources I had. But the mission of the rifle didn't stop there. I'm going to collect as many stories as I can on what it's like to live a successful life after combat and the hell you went through. This gentleman right here, he's Japanese American, also with the 34th Division. The 34th Division enacted a regiment known as the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which are composed of all Japanese Americans during the Second World War. In 1943, 42, 43, if you were Japanese American, you were not allowed to enlist in the US military, period. If you were already Japanese and already listening in the military and you were a sergeant, you were anything, you're cleaning latrines, your bathroom duty, you got stripped of your rank, stripped of your position, stripped out of your platoon, your company. It was a terrible thing to be, for it to happen to Japanese Americans already serving in the military. That man right there, his name is Lawson Sakai. He was a Japanese American from California. And in 1943, him and all of his friends went marching down to the recruiting office to join the military. And they said, they let his friends join because they were white, and they said, you cannot join. You are an illegal, you are an enemy alien. He was considered an enemy alien. They stamped it on his record, and he was not allowed to join the army at that time. So after leaving the recruiting station with his friends, he's got this paperwork that says he's an enemy alien, and all of his friends got to join the military. His family is getting ready to get put into internment camps. All the Japanese Americans' families are now getting put in internment camps. Luckily, the Japanese American Defamation League, Anti-Defamation League, start to become a powerful voice in the US government. They fight Congress and they say, create a battalion of all Japanese Americans, and Congress approves it. They form what's called, at this time, the 100th Battalion. They make their way to Italy, they fight like no other, and General Mark Clark says, send me more Japanese Americans, okay? Now Lawson is allowed to join the military. They even go to the internment camps and allow the Japanese Americans of military age to say, you can join the military now. Some don't do it, some say, screw you, you just put my family in a camp. But a lot of Japanese Americans from California and Hawaii do, and they form the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, who to this day are the most highly decorated regiment of US military history. They fought all through Italy and France. They rescued a lost battalion of the 36th Division. Lawson Sakai, another man, multiple Bronze Stars, 4 Purple Hearts. Unbelievable story going from zero to hero. Like they did, and still today, to this day, not feeling sorry for themselves, not holding anyone specifically accountable, and they have their own reunions every year in Las Vegas, which I got to join with Lawson and hear all about how he was an enemy alien to war hero. Again, they were part of the 34th Division, the Red Bulls, and if you guys remember. Congressman Danny Inouye from Hawaii, he was also in that, he's a Medal of Honor recipient, he was also in that regiment as well. Every one of those guys, highly decorated, amazing, amazing stories, and that is another story of inspiration to the younger veterans as well. Not only are you dealing with being a combat veteran and the stresses, but the odds are stacked against you. They obviously weren't allowed to serve in the Pacific. God forbid someone thought they were Japanese, enemy Japanese soldiers and wearing American uniforms. So they fought in Italy, they fought in Europe, they fought in France. The 36th Division, everybody at this rate, I believe in January 44, January 45, February 45, every general wanted to be the first general to march into Germany, to get to Germany first, and there was this big rush to get into Germany, and the 36th Division, one of their battalions got stuck in the Vosges Mountains, which were France's known lumber area of the country. The trees were 6 feet around. Okay, so when artillery shells were hitting them, Lawson Sakai, I remember seeing one of his other fellow Japanese American soldiers, ducking, and the artillery was missing him, but the tree landed on him and crushed him. Lawson took shrapnel right through his ribs that day, and that was his last Purple Heart. That was his 4th Purple Heart, and he served honorably. Sticking with, let's face it, the military was segregated in the 1940s, and most of the men on this rifle ended up being Caucasian white males. So I didn't see that I wanted to also make this a diverse rifle. I interviewed Tuskegee Airmen, I interviewed Navajo Code Talkers, I interviewed female nurses. But what I thought was amazing is during the Second World War, raise your hand if you heard of the Navajo Code Talkers. Pretty much everyone, right? Again, they were, the most sexy mission is the one that makes the Hollywood, right? They were Marines, they fought on Iwo Jima, the Navajo Code Talkers, just like the 101st Airborne, they jump into Normandy, they're paratroopers. But there was 12 different dialects of Native American languages spoken during World War II. It wasn't just Navajo. Right here, my good friend there, Mohawk Code Talker, okay? Levy Oaks. He is the last living World War II veteran of the Mohawk Nation who spoke Mohawk language during the Second World War. Silver Star recipient, Purple Heart recipient, fought in the Philippines with the U.S. Army. They also spoke Mohawk, Cherokee, Choctaw, Seminole, Iroquois, and you know, you get the point. There was 12 different other dialects of Native American languages spoken to help defeat the Japanese. Believe it or not, people always ask me, why didn't they use code talkers in Europe? Because actually, from what I heard, from what I understand, and I could be wrong, someone said, but I guess the Germans actually weren't breaking our code in Europe, and then the Japanese were. How are we doing on time? Not sure. Okay. So, I didn't give up. I thought I would have gave up once I found that, you know, I found out what happened to my uncle and I got my own closure and things like that. And I decided to, you know, put this selfless, you know, mission in my head saying, no, let's still talk to these World War II veterans while we still have them. There's been billions of books written on World War II. I'm not special. But what I thought was good about my mission is you had the youngest generation of America's veterans saying goodbye to the oldest generation of veterans and what they could pass on. One thing that I found interesting was Frank Buckles, who was America's last World War I veteran. He died in 2011 at age 110. And he was an ambulance driver, if I'm correct on that, and served in World War I. And when he died, I just happened to think of that whole generation that we had lost, that we never got to maybe talk to. Well, obviously people talk to them. There's books, there's movies, there's documentaries, but I thought about what was happening with today's veterans, and you know, I remember coming back from Iraq, and there's yellow ribbons on cars and trees, and welcome home, and thank you for your service. And then I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years, and by the time I got home from Afghanistan, it was, are you okay? Are you all right? Do you have PTSD? It's like, you know, what happened in that 6 years of development? I mean, it's just simply the stigma, the nonprofits, you know, promoting that, you know, veterans have issues, and it started to follow my generation around. And I started to feel as an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran that my generation went from the volunteer generation after 9/11 to kind of the poor me generation. I didn't like what was going on with my guys. And not to mention, PTSD is very real. But it's simply just not, it was getting force-fed down everybody's mouths and throat, and it should be, you know, be a survivor, not a victim, in my eyes. And it's something that I hope to promote with my book, The Rifle, which is stories of the 111 on here. There's about, I picked 20 of the best stories, which you've heard about 2 of them, for this book. On this rifle, there's 2 Medal of Honor recipients. There's 3 Distinguished Service Crosses. There's 1 Navy Cross. There's 9 Silver Stars. Almost everyone on here has a Bronze Star. I couldn't tell you how many people on here have Purple Hearts. I'd have to add that up. And there's 5 ex-POWs on here, 6 ex-POWs. I just got another one in Colorado. Every branch of the service is represented. Every corner of the war is represented on the rifle. And when the last man on this rifle dies, I will be donating this to the National World War II Museum, which will be rotating on display as something a younger veteran did for the greatest generation of veterans. as I said, there's 111 men on here, and today I'm hoping that Pat Flynn becomes 112, that you sign my rifle, sir. So I'd love to have you and represent your division on this rifle. You'll be the first man from the 45th Division to be on this rifle. So everyone will get a chance to see him sign it and remember this day. I'm running out of gas. Yeah.
How would you like to stage that?
We can go right over to the case and I'll pull his chair up and we'll sign it. I gotta be at 40 minutes right now, right? At least. Okay.
Yeah, then we're gonna have a nice Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't we,
Do you want to have the discussion first?
yeah,
before
I'd
the
love to,
signing?
I would love to have some Q&A going on and then we can watch Mr. Flynn sign his name to this. He has a nice short name, so it's gonna make it perfect to squeeze in on this, you know?
Okay, let's get the questions going. Ed, do you have a microphone? I'll take this half, Ed will take that half. Muffy, you're first.
Yep, I want you to take a photo of me. Yep.
Okay, Andrew, first question over here.
Yes, ma'am.
What are the two nonprofits that you have right now?
So it's actually one nonprofit, and it's known as New England's Wounded Veterans. Our big event is called the Boston's Wounded Vet Run. You may or may not have seen it on the news. It's about 5,000 motorcycles. We all gear up, and we raise money for severely wounded veterans. Every year I pick different wounded veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan from the New England area, and we provide them with brand new cars, remodel their homes, pay off their debt, create them a recreational need where if they want to go, if they want a customized ATV four-wheeler to enjoy the great outdoors, we'll do things like that.
So it's not related to
No,
this
no
project?
correlation.
Okay.
I started off really helping my own guys. I served as an infantryman in the Marine Corps. I had friends that were severely wounded, and I rode a motorcycle, and 10 years ago, I asked a bunch of people to get together, and like 300 of us got together. We put a new roof on a soldier's house who had his whole skull replaced with plastic after being injured in Iraq. And I went to Afghanistan. My friend walked in a house. There was an IED in the wall, and it blew off both his legs. And so we came home. We did the motorcycle run again. It turned into 1,200 motorcycles. I bought him a brand new Cadillac Escalade. I said, this is fun. And why not keep doing it for different wounded veterans? I don't take a salary from it. I'm a police officer in the town of Winthrop, Massachusetts. And yeah, so that's my nonprofit.
Okay, Tom, you're next.
Andy wanted to share a story of a veteran. It's very much in line with what you're discussing. Diane and I met Fred Poggy. He lived in Norwood. He was from Hartford, and we met him at the Norwood Airport with one of the Collins events.
Yep.
Anyway, Fred was in the 102nd Division, the Ozarks, and they were assaulted in northern Germany, late 44, early 45. Fred loved his Garand. He didn't have his one from the war, but got to see him P1 after the war. One story he shared is they were assaulting a village in the Ruhr Valley, and there was a German sniper in the bell tower, as often happened. And anyway, nobody could take this guy out. So the lieutenant ordered him and the two other best shots, get this guy. And they just couldn't get a shot at the German sniper. So what Fred finally did is he shot the bell several times, rang the bell with his Garand, and scared the guy out of it. So,
You said the 106th, right?
102nd, the Ozark Division.
Okay, 102nd. Yep. I don't have anyone from the 102nd on here too. Is he still alive?
I'm afraid he passed away 2 years ago.
Yeah, I deal with that all the time, but that's an awesome story, and that whole generation just has these stories that you couldn't create, you couldn't make up. Sets of brothers fighting together, father and son fighting together, prisoners being shot out of the sky and hidden by civilians. It's just, it was a extraordinary time, and unfortunately, I always said, World War II killed and estimated something like 80 million people, and but at the same time, it's made so many people rich, like movies and TV and books, and it's quite the complex situation. So, as great as the stories are, we hope it never happens again.
Yeah, I have a little bit more mundane story. It's not battle, but my father was a World War II veteran, and he's drafted on D-Day, But he started an apprenticeship at the Watertown Arsenal in 1939, and his first task was a crate full of M1s to test them out. And they had a rifle range in the Watertown Arsenal, and so his task was to fire these guns until they failed, then take all the failed guns and figure out what happened to them.
Yeah.
And what he come up with is that the firing pin, either the tip that hits the percussion cap would break off, the cane head that the hammer would hit would break.
Right.
And so he tallied him. He says only a few of them had shells jammed, but all the failures were in that. And so they said, oh, what do you suggest as a solution? He says, well, maybe we'll use a different steel. So one of his research projects was to, what do they make it out of? And it's like this fully hardened steel. So his recommendation, and they actually built one of this, he used spring steel for it. So, and he says when he first fired those, the old ones would be erratic firing, but this would have a rhythmic tap, 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 tap when they fired. And so they wrote up the report, and after that they reboxed everything and sent it up to, I think, Springfield Armory, and send the information, and they'd go from there. So what I'm trying to figure out is how do I trace back, see if there's any shipping information or anything that from the Watertown Arsenal. Is there an archives for that?
I would go straight to the Springfield Museum.
Oh.
The Springfield Armory has a museum there with plethora of information, books, running serial numbers on rifles, everything. If in fact it was Springfield, this is a Winchester, but if in fact it was Springfield, you could probably get a lot of intel from the people up there. And naturally, the Springfield Armory is still a working, open company.
Oh,
so,
okay. It's interesting.
Yep.
Terrific.
Yep.
Okay, in the back here.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you for what you're doing and bless you for what you're doing. It is tremendous. Secondly, I wondered how many in this room have used an M1? How many have had M1 thumb at least once? When you are loading the weapon, you have to pull back and then use your thumb to push in the clip, and at the same time let go. And often your thumb was still there as it was closing. Pat, did you ever have that?
That's a Springfield rifle.
And I think I'm switching to Rolling Rock beer, by the way, too.
I told Rolling Rock to get a hold of this guy for a commercial, for crying out loud.
A Springfield rifle, what you had to do is keep your thumb
Andrew.
out.
Yes, sir.
Was your uncle's remains, did he come back to the United States or stay in Italy?
That's a great question. So he was buried at first in a temporary graveyard called Castle Fiorentino, where if you were killed in September on the Gothic Line, they were putting your body in there. In 1948, maybe 47, I could be wrong, the U.S. government sent notifications to all family members who had guys killed in action and said, it is up to you if you want, at the government's expense, we will ship your son's remains home for burial, or he can stay here in, let's say, Rome or Normandy at a permanent cemetery. My great-grandmother did not take the death of my great uncle, lightly. My grandfather said she'd never put up the Christmas tree again, and it was her firstborn son, and obviously she said, I want my son's remains home. So in 1948, they did a funeral mass for him in Winthrop, and he's buried at a beautiful, he's buried in Mount Calvary in Rosendale, and his gravestone is bronze with him in his uniform. It's unbelievable. So my great-grandfather worked at the, before it was the MTA, it was the North Atlantic Bus Company.
Boston Elevator.
Yeah, so.
What's an elevated railway?
That's what he was. That's where he worked. And so I always wondered what kind of salary he was making to have a grave like that back then. But, so he's buried in Boston. And I've been to the cemetery he would have been at, which would have been Florence American National Cemetery, and they just do an unbelievable job. If you've ever seen a foreign U.S. military cemetery, it is DC. It's better than DC quality. It is just beautiful. It's a beautiful cemetery. But that was a good question, and So when I was trying to put the puzzle pieces together, who knew my uncle, in those letters, there was a photo of a guy next to his little wooden cross buried in that temporary cemetery. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy? Like, where is he? I think his name was, I forget what his name was, but we found that he died in 2006 in Florida. And I said, shit, I just missed him. But he went back to visit the, and was sending the letters to my great-grandmother saying, hey, I found Andy's grave over there, and, so.
Okay, next, John.
This is really the most impressive lecture I think I've heard in a long, long time. And I'm really, listening to you, I couldn't get the thought out of my mind. Somehow you're going to be videoed, and every high school has to watch you, listen to this. I mean, it is, just amazing, and I think it's how you personalized it that really just makes it so effective.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
That's the nicest thing I've heard in a while. So.
I think we still have more questions. Jim?
Yes, Andrew, I was just interested in maybe one story about what the result was when you shared these stories with veterans of your age who may be struggling. How were they helped by it?
So a lot of today, actually someone called me a millennial earlier today, but and they're not wrong. But now, like, my generation veterans are on social media, right? So back in the day, if you were a veteran, and still today, we go to our local VFW meetings, we go to our Lexington Veterans Association meetings, we go to our American Legion VFW DAV meetings, and everyone gets in a circle in the room, and that's the way we would communicate and bond after the war, things like that. Today, it's simple. You just go on your phone, and you're immediately on a group with 20 other guys who fought in Iraq, or 20 other guys who served in Afghanistan. So on my Instagram page and on my Facebook page, I'm constantly uploading photos of these men and videos of their stories. And guys are watching it at home on their recliner in their chair, and watching this interview I did with Lawson Sakai, or watching this interview I did with, Sergeant Jerry Smith, or seeing a photo of Jerry Kluge-Cajun from Newton, Massachusetts, who still has half his arm blown off and was an insurance agent for 40-something years. And he's 96 years old, still with like 2 fingers on one arm after being hit in Bastogne by an artillery shell. And they're saying this, and there are comments, and there are hundreds and there's thousands of comments, and people liking these photos and sharing these stories. And so I know I am doing something for them, and I know they are seeing how remarkable they are. And maybe in the back of their mind, they're like, maybe one day I could be glorified like this, So I know that's from what I know, I can see that. And then obviously we'll know if people buy the book and they like the book, and libraries and museums adopt the book, then I'll really know if we did a good job or not. So.
Next question, right here.
How much does that weigh?
So a lot of the veterans that tell me this is 8 pounds. Someone else said 9 pounds something else today.
9.48.
What is it?
9.48.
9.48. So.
That's a nice idea, yeah. Okay. Are we running out of questions?
I have one other question.
Oh, one more. We took it away too soon.
Can you just say something about your efforts to try and have the veterans seen as survivors and not as victims? And any resistance you get to that message?
Resistance from the younger guys or the older guys?
How about both?
So it's a complex topic, right? So I'm a firm believer that a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a person who develops a psychological issue simply just can't be blamed on the military. Sometimes it can. Most of the time, a lot of people with issues had already joined the military before that. And they come out and, people will say, well, my kid's on heroin now because he served in the Marine Corps. No, I think your son might have done drugs before the military. And so when I would sit down with a veteran going through some serious issues, because people would forward me their phone numbers, can you talk to my cousin, he's having a hard time. Can you talk to this guy? Hey, you're a cop, can you go to this house and help this veteran out? And naturally, I did multiple tours over there, and I seen some rough stuff, and I'm not perfect at all. I found my therapy, right, more or less. And so whenever I try to, most of the time when I do go down that road with a younger veteran and being a survivor, not a victim, I've never gotten resistance. I've actually gotten a little bit of, they can see the light a little bit. Whether I've been successful in that, I think so. And then whether it went to hell in a handbasket after that, I guess I'd have to follow up on what happened after those conversations, after that persuasion, after doing things like that. But it's the point of the matter is I talked to one veteran on this rifle, okay? His name was Bernard Ruchin. He went on, I took particular interest in interviewing World War II veterans who became police officers after World War II. Because today, if you take the civil service exam, and if you admit to the doctor or the police officer, the police chief that's interviewing you to be a cop, and they say, do you have PTSD, that could disqualify you from being a cop. Right. Nobody wants a combat fatigued veteran with PTSD carrying a gun on their hip. But when they came back from World War II, Bernard Ruchin became a New York State Trooper for 22 years. He was in the Battle of Saipan and survived the biggest banzai charge of the Second World War, okay? He was there. The unit was there, the company was there, the platoon was there, the after-action reports, he was there. There was 2,000 Japanese soldiers with their back pushed against the end of Saipan. They weren't getting relieved, they weren't getting picked up, they were out of ammunition. They charged the Marine Corps' lines with bayonets, swords, and a little bit ammunition they had left. He's in the foxhole, plugging away, firing away, and the Japanese soldier comes right up on him, and he sticks the bayonet in the Japanese soldier, and he kills him, okay? He killed a man with a knife, okay? Not even shooting him from far away, he killed the guy up close and personal. He went on to become a New York State Trooper for 22 years after that. Well, how do you go from killing a guy with a goddamn knife and then being a state trooper, just keeping it together? And he's a hardcore man, and he said, well, everyone has a different thank you, preparation for weakness. And everyone's different. And I thought about how, that's something that definitely the doctor or a VA person would not say, but he wasn't wrong. The brain is a muscle just like any other part of your body on what it can take and what it can handle. He then, when I asked him, did you ever get any calls, 911 calls about a veteran having an episode? And he said, yes, I did. Me and my partner, who was also another veteran from the Pacific, got a call to go to whatever New York town it was in the town center, and that there was a guy running around with a machete. They get down there, and one of the bystanders says, please don't hurt him, he fought in Europe during World War II. And so, they were, long story short, they were able to distract the guy, tackle him, get the machete out of his hands, and arrest him. And that's when he learned that everyone had a different perpetuation for weakness on how they handled the war afterwards. And of course, the World War II generation of vets were not perfect, guys. A lot of guys came home, they drank themselves to death. I interviewed World War II veterans' kids who said, my dad beat us, my mother beat me, beat everything. He was crazy after the war. Things like that. And then the World War II veterans I know that were law enforcement back then said they didn't even treat domestic violence like they did then. They just turned their head to it. They ignored it. It's just simply what happened. So naturally they weren't perfect, but it was you have to take it in amounts of what good came out of it and what messages you can send, because the world isn't a perfect place and not everyone's normal. So I don't know if I got carried away on that, but I guess.
No, it was a very thoughtful answer to a very difficult question. Okay, the last question of the day is going to be posed by Edlo Turco.
It's related directly to the rifle.
Mm-hmm.
In your experiences, have you fired that weapon?
Nope.
Have you fired an M1?
No, actually I haven't.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, what's the experience of firing an M1 now in the world that we are in today? you know, various weapons in Afghanistan and Iraq. Have you talked to anybody that might have done that? And
Yeah,
found out
so,
what kind of war we
so
fighting?
I've never fired the M1 in particular, but I fired old rifles. I fired the Springfield, the Enfield, the M1 Carbine. And when the men talk about this rifle and why it won World War II, and General Patton said it was the rifle that won World II, is because it was the first semi-automatic rifle that you first got, right? So you put an 8-round clip in it and it's bang, 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 bang. While the Germans are still, you know, the Germans are still doing bolt action stuff. The Japanese are still doing bolt action stuff. You could almost make this automatic if you wanted to by how fast you're able to pull that trigger. So that's, I mean, in the military, you learn you win firefights by superior firepower, by fire and maneuver. You want to be sending as much rounds downrange against the enemy, so superior firepower. And that's what you had whole infantry line units using. Everyone was able to blast off 8 rounds, and if you were hot shit infantrymen, you could put another 8-round clip in there and keep going. And when they say that, I picture my experience as a Marine infantryman with a 30-round clip, okay? Or 28 rounds. I never put 30 rounds in there because I didn't want to, you know, weaken the springs of my magazines. I usually put 27, 28 rounds in my M16. And I felt like a god with that thing in country. And so I can only imagine how they felt with this, you know, so.
Okay. Before we actually sign off, we just have a special guest with us today, and I want to introduce her. I think most people know her, and that's Susan Johansen. Hello, Susan. Familiar name. Susan's husband, Bill Johansen, was the leader of our group for many years. We all knew and loved Bill, and Susan makes it a point to come back and visit with us as often as she can. We're so happy to have her with us. Okay, now, if I can just ask everybody to stay in your seats, we're going to have a little signing ceremony. Pat's going to stay in his seat, and Andrew, you figure out how to do it. We're going to take a picture, have a little photo op. It'll just take 2 minutes, and then we're going to finish up.